Okay, everybody, I think I'm live. So I'm just going to take a second and get myself together, get things ready. Hopefully you are tuning in from somewhere nice and cozy. It's sort of chilly out, so I'm just getting all my stuff ready for you. Again, this is like, this is like the great rocket launch every time. Eee. Let's do full screen. So let us do that. Okay, I think we're here. I'm just going to double check that everything's working. And then, oops, oh no, don't look. Okay, 1 second. See if we're good to go. Yes, we are. Awesome. Hey, everybody. I am Rebecca Fons. I am Gorton Community Center's Director of Film, and so I program film in the John and Nancy Hughes Theater. Welcome to our second Gorton Community Center curated cinema session. And I'm super excited to be sharing with you guys some really, really great scary movies to get you into the mood for Halloween, which is next weekend, which is incredible. And today's weather definitely feels like Halloween weather. So I'm excited to share this with you. I'm going to be down here in this little Zoom box. And then I'm going to give you some slides because film is a visual medium and I really like to share some photos with you from the films that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about 5 films and I may have some bonus films at the end that I want to share with you. And in the chat, in the comments, please respond to what I'm saying with like, I love this film or I hate this film or have you never seen it? Also, I want to pose a question at the top and I'll ask it again. I'm actually going to put it in the comments. I'm going to ask, do you love or hate horror films? So do you love or hate horror films? I know a lot of people it's a non-starter for them. They're like, I can't do horror. It's too scary. I don't like to be grossed out. I don't like to be freaked out. So it's sort of a non-starter. So because I know that, and I'm kind of in that same world as well, I'm presenting to you 5 films that aren't necessarily like gross out movies. They all contain a little bit of like potentially gore, but it's like gore with a lowercase g. It's not like super gross like slasher movies, blood pouring everywhere. So hopefully you will not turn away in fright. Hopefully you will hang out and hear some of these films because there's a little something for everything here, everybody here, and I think you'll maybe get some watch lists put together. And I also would say, I've said this before, but screaming feels really good. Like even if it's not a pandemic and like a really crazy political climate, or a cold day, or whatever the case may be, whatever the thing is that you are, even if you had a really good day, like going to a scary movie and screaming. Or even when, like, I know my husband, like, he very rarely scares me, but the few times he has, like, the moment I scream, then I just start giggling. And that feels really good. It can be very cathartic and very, like, energy releasing. So I would say consider the scream. It could be really fun. And then also I will say there's only 5 films here. I had to really, no pun intended, kill my darlings, since we're talking about scary movies with murderers in them. And there's so many other really great thrillers and horror films that I didn't include here, but I wanted to provide a really robust list. And I'll also just a little like story about me is that when I was a kid, I was a nerd. Shocking, I know. And so when I was in high school, like a bunch of kids in my school would like go out to, keg parties and whatever. But my friends and we would spend our Friday and Saturday nights renting scary movies, renting horror movies from the local video store on VHS, no less. And so I actually spent some very seminal years watching scary movies, the really, really bad like horror slasher movies, and then much more sort of refined horror films. So it's weird because I don't really gravitate towards horror films, but I strangely have seen a lot of them. And so I come to this list with that experience and do my best to present to you 5 films that I think are unique. So we're going to start with our first one, which is Night of the Living Dead. So Night of the Living Dead is 1968. It's directed by George Romero. And this film is sort of the first zombie movie. And what's unique about it is the word zombie is never said in this movie. So it's the ghouls or the things outside or the flesh eaters, but no character in the movie ever says zombie. But this was the movie that really crystallized some of those zombie tropes, so you got to shoot them in the head, they eat the flesh, they rise from the graves. This is the film that invented all of that. So without Night of the Living Dead, you don't have The Walking Dead. You don't have 28 Days Later. You don't even have a film like Shaun of the Dead, which is an Edgar Wright film, very funny, and really clearly inspired by Night of the Living Dead. So in this film, a group of people that don't really know each other are brought together in this abandoned house when the dead begin walking again, rising again, and searching for human flesh to devour. And there's a character named Ben who is a young guy who's trying to kind of be the hero and save the day. But as the group of people are in this abandoned house, and as the zombies start getting closer and closer, sort of all hope is lost, and panic sets in, and they descend into chaos. So one by one, things do not go well for these people in the house. One by one, they suffer their environment and perish. And I think that maybe doesn't sound all that unique, but what I really like about this film is that there's really no hope. So often in movies, there's like a hero and he's going to save the day, or she's going to save the day. And there's like, they've just got to get this key, or they've got to get to this one room and they're going to be fine. This film sort of proposes that they aren't going to be fine. It's sort of Shakespearean in that way, in that sort of by the end, it's just everybody has died, and like sort of hope is lost. And even things that they take, like different things that they take up to protect themselves. So like they go into the house then becomes their grave. They use a car, the car, backfires metaphorically on them. So it's like even the tools that they use to survive end up being empty and not able to help them. And also, if you've ever heard someone say, "They're coming for you, Barbara," that is a line from this film. So that is a very, very famous line. A lot of people don't know what it's from. It's from Night of the Living Dead. So, and I also would say that, and we'll talk about this more with the other films, but the horror genre I really like the horror genre because often, there's a big scary monster or there's like a scary ghost, but those ghosts and monsters are actually metaphors for something else. Horror films can really contain multitudes. So a scary ghost may be a metaphor for grief, which we're actually going to talk about soon, or a monster may be a parallel for a systemic issue. So George Romero has said this isn't the case. He didn't mean to do this on purpose, but Night of the Living Dead has some real interesting parallels when you talk about race in America. And this film came out right when the civil rights era was happening, and it's really hard to watch and not sort of recognize those parallels, maybe specifically because Ben, the would-be hero, is a person of color, and he's doing his best to try to communicate what is needed to survive, to come together, to work together, and to equally survive. So it's interesting. I mean, again, George Romero's like, if you're reading into that, that's great, but it's certainly not something that he intended. So that's an interesting kind of way to read it, an interesting read on the film if you watch it with thinking about that. And also, like, if you're afraid of the gross out, the film's, it's scary. It's scary more on like a larger level than like a spooky, like, screaming scary. It's black and white, and they use like chocolate syrup for the blood. So it's gross, but it's not like today gross. It's not like super, it's not super grotesque. I guess that's the right way to say it. It's gross, but it's not super grotesque. And as I'm going to ask another question. Fave horror movie? If you have a favorite horror movie, let us know in the comments on this live video. Another fun thing about Night of the Living Dead is it's one of the last movies that was released without a rating. So the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, was founded shortly after this, and ratings started happening on film. So this is one of the ones that snuck in first. And It's really great. I mean, if you see these pictures, I have some more here. So there's Ben, he's doing his best to save the day. There's Barbara in the top right, and then there's another character who I will not disclose in the bottom right. And if you watch this film and you like it, some complimentary viewing is George Romero's follow-up, which is 1978's Dawn of the Dead, which takes place in a shopping center, and that feels definitely like a commentary on capitalism, because they all run into a shopping center, a shopping mall to hide themselves away from the zombies. And then Danny Boyle's 2002 film, 28 Days Later. If you're afraid of the gore, I would definitely avoid that one. He sort of invented the fast zombie. Whereas, in George Romero's world, the zombies are very slow. Danny Boyle started the fast zombies, and it is very, very scary. So Night of the Living Dead is sort of cut off there, but it's available to stream on HBO Max, on Canopy, on Amazon Prime, and the Criterion Collection, and you can also rent it on iTunes. So check that out. Also, look how beautiful it is. That black and white. It was this really, really low budget film, independent film, and they made it happen. So it's really beautiful and fun to watch. Okay, so the next one we're going to do is Don't Look Now. So this is 1973, and it's directed by Nicholas Roeg, and you can see Mr. Donald Sutherland, who's wearing a toupee. He has real hair, but he's wearing a toupee in this movie. His luscious locks aren't real. And then that's Julie Christie, who's never been better costumed or more gorgeous on screen. And they play husband and wife named John and Laura. And the film begins with a tragedy. Their daughter, Christine, drowns. And it's really incredibly rendered and very, very intense. And they're grieving, and they haven't quite got through the grieving process. And they head to Venice, Italy, because John has been commissioned to restore a church there. And when they're there, they're sort of disconnected because they've had this horrible loss. And when they're there, the wife, Laura, meets these two sort of mysterious sisters, one of whom is blind, and the sisters claim that they're in touch with the spirit of John and Laura's dead daughter. Laura takes them seriously. John is like, that's crazy. But he starts to catch glimpses of his daughter in the streets of Venice. And more mysterious things happen that sort of pull the couple apart emotionally, and also drive John into kind of a grief quagmire, if you will. So the film is adapted from a 1971 short story by Daphne du Maurier, who wrote The Birds and who wrote Rebecca, which is now which was a Hitchcock film and is now recently rebooted on Facebook. And I feel like I have to watch it because my name's Rebecca. I'll have to get to that. It's really, this is one of those films where I really think that previous theory of like horror films being a metaphor, or the scary thing being sort of a parallel for a deeper human instinct and a deeper human response. So grief is the driving force in this film. They've lost their daughter. It's haunting them, literally haunting them. She's haunting them. They are haunted. They're a haunted shell of a couple. And Nicholas Roeg had an incredible eye, and he articulates this cinematically in a couple of ways. One is the color red. When the daughter passes, and I'm in front of some red, which is interesting because that poster, I'm sort of covering it up, but the red of my poster sort of matches. Anyway, so when Christine, their daughter, dies, she's wearing this red slicker, this red raincoat. And that's such a searing color, because around them, the rest of the palette is you can even see it in this image, the rest of the palette is sort of neutrals, creams, beiges, but there's always this red. And so you're continually reminded of the daughter that they lost, the red slicker, the red rain jacket, and other instances of red appear. There's a photograph that water spills on it and it creates this red smear in the celluloid. There's red in almost every single scene in the film. And so it just is this constant literal color haunting of you. You're always thinking of Christine. And then of course, Donald Sutherland's character is literally seeing his daughter in the streets of Venice. And so you actually see that rain slicker appear again. And another interesting choice, which wasn't even in the short story. In the short story, the daughter dies a different way. I think it's just of an illness, of an infection. But Nicholas Roeg has chosen to make water a really critical part of this film. So the daughter drowns, and then they go to Venice, and they're surrounded by water. You know, they're crossing water on bridges. There's gondolas. It's also cold, and water is just a constant feeling in the film. So the red color and the water really kind of create this, you can't escape the tragedy that has happened. There's not that much like scary jump out of you stuff that's happening for the majority of the film. There's certainly, it's bookended by very scary incidences, but really it's more about these people dealing with grief and really struggling with that grief. And I think the film overall is just trying to show you how grief can trick your mind, it can trick your emotions, and that's done through the editing, blurring, memories with things that they're imagining and in the present day. I would caution, this is a very adult film. There is a scene that almost got them a X rating back in the day, but it's an incredibly respected film in the art house world, in the horror genre, in the thriller genre, and Donald Sutherland says it's his favorite film that he's ever performed in. He named his son Roeg after the director Nicholas Roeg, and it's just a really, really both incredible performances from Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. And it's a film like you will feel like you are like smarty pants after you watch this movie, because it's a really, really incredible rendering of a horror film. It doesn't really feel like a regular horror film. And I would say some complimentary viewing to Don't Look Now would be, look at that color palette, my goodness, would be Ordinary People, the Robert Redford film. Not a horror movie, but certainly also showing how a family deals with grief, and sort of how they can be haunted by it. And then Pet Sematary. That's Stephen King adaptation, but a really sort of underrated film. There's the 1989 original film, which is directed by Mary Lambert, and then there was a 2019 remake, which I have not seen, so I cannot speak to its success. But those films really deal with like grief and sort of the things that we do, the human part of ourselves that maybe is scary after we lose someone we love. And also Nicholas Roeg, if you're looking for something that he's directed that is more family friendly, I just rewatched The Witches, his 1990 film with Angelica Houston, and my husband had never seen it. We just watched it the other night, and man, it is fantastic. So it's been remade. It's coming out on video on demand, I think this weekend. But check out the Nicholas Roeg original. It's on Netflix right now, of The Witches. And you can check out Don't Look Now on Amazon Prime and the Criterion Collection to stream if you have accounts with them. It's also available to rent on iTunes. Okay, our next one, third, and maybe my favorite, is Halloween. So Halloween is 1978. It's directed by John Carpenter, and this is a nice moment for me to do a plug. So we have our Ghoulish Feature Fest coming up at Gorton, and it's all next week on October 29th. We have, for the younger set on October 29th, we have two films. Hotel Transylvania is at 4 o'clock, and House with a Clock in Its Walls is at 7 o'clock on October 29th. That's Thursday. And then on Friday, October 30th, we have Creature from the Black Lagoon at 6 o'clock, and Halloween, which we're going to talk about now, at 8:30. Tickets for each of those films are $5. Seating is limited, 50 seats total in our 309-seat John and Nancy Hughes Theater. Get your tickets now. It's really fun to watch all these movies in the big screen, especially the scary stuff. And if you have kiddos, Hotel Transylvania is totally appropriate for the really, really young kids. House with the Clock in Its Walls, I think young kids can handle it, but teens and tweens especially. And then Creature from the Black Lagoon is really very fun for all ages. And then Halloween is for the folks who are really wanting a fright. So I'll share a little bit about Halloween, and I'm also going to drop in while I'm doing this. Hold on. Don't mind me while I do a little production here. So here's some information about Hotel Transylvania, if you want to do that. And I'll drop in House of the Clock in Its Walls if you want to buy tickets for that. And I'll drop in the adult, the more scary stuff in just a second. So Halloween, 1978, John Carpenter. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And I have seen Halloween over a dozen times. It still gets me, I just actually lost my breath a little bit because I'm so spooked. It gets me every time. It scares me every time. And I'll tell you why, but here's the synopsis. So The film begins, it's 1963. We meet a little 6-year-old kid named Michael Myers. He commits a really brutal crime. And you see that. So I'll tell that part in a second. And then he goes to prison for 15 years, insane asylum for 15 years. Halloween night, 1963. Halloween night, 15 years later, 1978, he escapes from the mental institution and returns to the scene of the crime to scout out his next victims. So I love this film for a lot of reasons, partially just because it scares me so much. But some of the things I really love are it begins with this crime, the sort of origin story of Michael Myers, and he's a little kid, and he puts on this mask, which later becomes sort of like, you know, his mask is super iconic. But we go inside the mask with him. So we are seeing the crime as it's taking place. And that's so fascinating because we're sort of like complicit in the crime. And that's super unique and super interesting. So we have this like really intimate connection with him and this crime that he's committed. But then he becomes this like super bad guy. So you have this really strange relationship with Michael Myers. And I think they play with that as the sequels go on. He becomes at times even a sympathetic character, or just a truly like troubled character, but he's also this like super killer. And also what scares me about Halloween is the film is not about, you know, ghosts or like a Freddy Krueger with his like, you know, crazy like puns and like crazy like setups. It's just about a scary guy. And he's a very quiet, scary guy. And what I think the reason it gets me so much is, and the film even talks about this, like he is the boogeyman embodied. You know, he's quiet, he's methodical, he's planned, he's super smart. And so the idea that he's just never ending, never stopping, this sort of stalker, and he doesn't talk, and he doesn't have, you know, again, like Freddy Krueger has all these puns and jokes and things, kind of takes you out of the fear because it's just sort of silly. Michael Myers is just scary, and he is relentless. And that is all very scary to me. Another thing that I love about it, I'm going to drop this in. I was going to maybe try to play this, but I was worried that it would mess up the live stream. So I'm going to put in here the scary music from Halloween. I think that's it. So the score from this film, which is made by John Carpenter, he's also a composer as well as a director, is iconic. And I mean, like, it's scary on a sunny afternoon in May. It's terrifying in Halloween. It's scary all the time. So it's a really, really great film. I think that's all I can say about it without just encouraging you to watch it, encouraging you to come to Gorton and watch it on the big screen. I was going to rewatch it at home, but my husband's out of town, and I was like, it's too scary. I can't do it. So it'll get under your skin for sure. And some complimentary viewing of the film would be any of the Halloween sequels. Some of them are actually really successful. Halloween 2 has some really, really great stuff in it. And there was a sequel 2 years ago in 2018, directed by David Gordon Green, and Laurie Strode, who Jamie Lee Curtis plays, is, you know, now a much older person, and it's sort of her revenge story, and it actually becomes a story about a bunch of women sort of fighting against Michael Myers. So all very, very great franchise films, and also it takes place in Haddonfield, Illinois. So if there's any Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, Chicagoland folks listening, it's even spookier because it's in our state. So that always freaked me out too. And here's some photos from that film. And this main photo, I'll just point out like how scary it is because it's like a sunny day. The majority of this film, or at least the first like 45 minutes, takes place during the day. And it's just like, there's Michael Myers like creeping behind a bush. Like, how scary is that? That's scarier to me than like an old haunted house or like a haunted cabin. Like, that image to me is so, so terrifying. And it's just like pleasant suburbia, spooky, spooky, spooky stuff. So Halloween is from 1978 and is available to stream on Fubo, and it's available to rent on Redbox and iTunes, and you can find it, you know, in all those streaming services. And you might even have a VHS of it on your shelf. You never know. It's a classic. Okay, so our next one is the Babadook. I wanted to make sure to include a female director in this lineup because there are a lot of really great female directors that are doing work in the horror genre. And I would just note that horror films and thriller films that genre has often been a place where female directors, directors of color, queer directors have had really great success because the genre took a lot more chances, and sort of there was always a less money involved, and so some of these emerging filmmakers who weren't normally at the table were given an opportunity to tell their story, often with metaphor and with parable and with parallel. So I just really love looking through all the old horror films. There's some iconic films directed by female filmmakers that go very far back. Even Ida Lupino, who did The Hitchhiker decades ago, black and white film, that's really groundbreaking. So I wanted to include a contemporary director. And before I do that, I'm just going to drop in the comments, the final information about the upcoming Ghoulish Fest. That's Creature from the Black Lagoon that I'm dropping in, and then Halloween links to get tickets. And again, just $5 for those tickets. So a really inexpensive night to watch some really spooky movies. Okay, so The Babadook is from 2014, and it's directed by an Australian director named Jennifer Kent. And the film is about a mother named Amelia and her son Sam, and her husband and Sam's father dies tragically, and she is really struggling after this incident, to understand her son, who seems to be spiraling out of control. He's plagued by a monster in his dreams that he thinks is going to come get them. He's lashing out at school, and she is sort of despondent because she's grieving. Again, this is a film that's about grief. And then on their doorstep shows up this storybook called The Babadook. And when they read the book, Samuel, the little boy, is convinced that the Babadook is the sort of the thing that's been haunting his dreams. And Amelia, who is even more frightened by her son now and more despondent, begins to really kind of spiral out of control. And it's very scary. The way it's rendered with the Babadook himself, who of course appears, is really, really terrifying. This is one of those films, whereas maybe the other ones that I've shown, Night of the Living Dead and Don't Look Now and Halloween, they have some scares, but they're not like jump scares. Like you can kind of feel them coming. The Babadook has scares that you will not be prepared for. And I mean, I saw it in the theater at the Chicago International Film Festival 6 years ago, and I screamed on the top of my throat because it really, really gets you good. So jump scares are those ones that they're kind of sneaky. If somebody pops out behind the curtain, or someone grabs someone, or there's a music cue, and they're really, really successful in the Babadook. So again, this is a film that I think is dealing not so much with a scary guy who wears a top hat, which the Babadook does, but more with the grief of Amelia and her son Sam, and how Sam is consumed by his grief and Amelia is trying to fight it back and defeat it and compartmentalize it. And when the Babadook appears or manifests itself, she can't push back against the grief. She has to face it. And when she does that, she's able to connect more with her son. That's sort of the idea, the sort of the thesis statement of the film. And it's really great how Jennifer Kent, the director, uses the house that they're in to sort of show you what's happening internally in their brains. So the house starts to kind of deteriorate a little bit. It starts to kind of become more scary, more shadowy, more horrifying as the film goes on. And William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, which is a very scary movie I did not include here, he said that the most terrifying film he's ever seen is The Babadook. So high praise from a director who knows how to really scare the pants off people. And I wanted to spend just a second talking about the sound of the film. And I couldn't even pull up a YouTube video of the sound the Babadook makes, because I was like, I'll get too scared. But the Babadook makes a very creepy noise, and it's really impactful and really effective. And I think scary movies and horror movies have always been really good at sound and music. Again, Halloween has that incredible sort of keyboard score. There's like synth scores for a lot of 70s and 80s horror movies. And what I love about horror is if you think about seeing a horror movie in the theater, it's all about the sound, because you're leaning forward, you're leaning in, is there going to be a scary guy under the the basement steps, or you're leaning back because you're aghast. So the sound really pulls you in. A quiet moment can really pull you in, and then a moment of music or a moment of a scream can push you back. So horror movies, they're incredibly visual, but they also really rely on this auditory element, and it's a physical experience to see it in the movies. It's really great. Jumping from a scare can be really, like I said, cathartic and terrific. So the Babadook has some really scary sounds, and the suspense is really built from the sounds that they make. So check that out. And here's some photos from the film. Don't worry, because some things go well. This is more of a happy ending than these photos may imply. But as you can see, the house, especially in that bottom right photo at the dining room table, the house really becomes a character and sort of becomes this space that is reflecting the feelings within Amelia and her son Sam's minds. It's really reflecting in the house itself. And you can watch The Babadook on Amazon Prime or iTunes. You can rent it there. And some complimentary viewing would be Ari Aster's Hereditary from a couple years ago, also very much about grief and a mother. And then Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. It's this may be a little bit of a stretch, but thinking about a woman and her role as a mother, there were a couple women who saw The Babadook that I talked to right afterwards, and they were like, this movie is about how hard and how terrifying it is to be a mother. That's what this movie is about. And I feel like Hereditary and Rosemary's Baby also have threads of that as well. So definitely check out Hereditary if you dare. And then the final film is Get Out. So this is 2017. This is directed by Jordan Peele. And the story sounds simple, but there are layers of complexity. So Chris, played by Daniel Kaluuya, who you see here, and his girlfriend Rose are going to meet her parents. Importantly, Chris is Black and Rose is white. So there are issues there are questions of sort of, will the parents accept him as a person of color? He feels sort of awkward about that. She, is sort of hyper aware of how her parents are going to receive him. And they go to this weekend getaway upstate to meet her parents. And from there, Chris begins observing some behavior, some things are said, and some incidents happen with different people on their property that make him realize not everything is what it seems in this beautiful upstate property. So this film, maybe more than any of the others that I've discussed, really leans into that idea of the horror film, providing an avenue for thematic metaphor and parallels and parables. So this film is 100,000 million%, and the director Jordan Peele, who's a Black director, has articulated as much in interviews, and it's certainly been analyzed as a discussion about race in America. It's incredibly interesting to me because the metaphor in this film, so often the metaphor is something that's not the real scary thing. So like the Babadook, the scary thing is the Babadook, but really the scary thing is grief, or like, that's an example, but like, the scary thing is really grief. It's not the Babadook. But in Get Out, the scary thing is the metaphor. So the scary thing is racism and the systemic racism issues, and that's the scary thing. That's the metaphor, and that's the scary thing. So I think it's really a unique film, in that there isn't a larger third tier. It's just the thing that's scary, that is the metaphor, is the thing that is scary in the real movie. So that's interesting. And the film also plays so much with the perception of eyes and how we see people. So Daniel Kaluuya here, this is a perfect picture. We're looking at his eyes and we see him close up. We see his eyes quite a lot. He's also a photographer, so he's capturing people's images. How Rose's parents see him is based on his appearance. And there's even an incident where someone, and I won't go into it because it'll be a huge spoiler, they actually there's a conversation about his eyes and how he sees the world and how he literally sees. So the film is really talking about stereotypes, how we articulate, we make stereotypes and assumptions about who people are just by looking at them, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to give too much away because it's really, there's some really great twists and turns. And when I saw this in the movie theater, wow, the audience, like, it was early enough in the film's run in the theaters that no one really knew what was coming. And I mean, it was a party. And Jordan Peele has said that the title Get Out comes from what he would think people in the theater would be screaming at the screen, like, get out of there. So it's called Get Out because of that. So it's a really great one to check out if you haven't already. Jordan Peele also directed the film Us, which came out in 2019. So that's definitely one to check out. But I think Get Out is even his more successful film. And he cites a bunch of the films well, at least a bunch of horror films, but he cites The Night of the Living Dead as a inspiration, Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, and even the film The Stepford Wives as inspiration for the film. So there's lots of, he's paying homage to horror films in this, and also introducing an entirely new concept, which is really exciting. And also, this is one of the only films in the horror genre that's been nominated for an Academy Award. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Jordan Peele won, but it also was nominated for Best Picture. And along with Get Out, there's also The Exorcist, Jaws, Silence of the Lambs, Sixth Sense, and Black Swan. Those are really the only horror films that have been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. And I think that's, the horror category often is sort of like we talked about at the beginning, kind of considered not it's a non-starter for people, or maybe it's considered lowbrow or subculture or something. So this Get Out really rose to kind of more mainstream, and also to a lot of critical acclaim, and received a lot of accolades, including that Academy Award. And complimentary viewing, like I said, would be Jordan Peele's Us. And then Ari Aster is a new director who did Hereditary, and then also Midsummer. And then another person to really look out for is Nia DaCosta. She is the director of the Candyman remake, which was due to be released this year, 2020, but is moved to an undetermined date because of COVID. So really looking forward to her take on Candyman. And she's another new voice that I'm interested to see take on scary movies. So here are some shots from from Get Out, and it's from 2017. It's available to rent on Amazon Prime and iTunes. Really easy to find this one, and really definitely encourage you to check it out. So in my last moments here, I want to give you 3 bonus films. So I had to choose. It was so hard. The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby didn't even make the list. The Shining didn't make the list, and I love The Shining. So many great films, but I wanted to include 3 more. So The Thing, which is another John Carpenter film, that is Mr. Kurt Russell as a character named MacReady. Talk about gore with a capital G, talk about horror with a capital H. This one is not for the faint of heart, but a really terrific film. Also is a metaphor, which I won't get into, but a really great one. And then on the top right, that is a picture from Leave Her to Heaven, which is directed by John Stahl. That's from 1945. That's Gene Tierney as a character named Ellen. This film isn't really like a horror movie, but it's a noir sort of suspense film. And this particular image is from a scene that I think is one of the scariest scenes in a movie ever. And it contains a woman sitting still. That's all I'll say. But a really incredible, spooky movie about a woman obsessed. And then on the bottom right, of course, is Jaws, 1975, directed by Steven Spielberg. That's Roy Scheider as Brody. He's about ready to say, "You're going to need a bigger boat." Just a great film, fun to watch when it's chilly outside because it takes place in July. Just a really a classic film. I've probably watched it, no joke, over 25 times. And again, it's not really about the shark. It's about the men on the boat, and masculinity, and even capitalism a little bit, maybe even tourism a little bit. But the shark's the thing. But it's a really great film because it contains more than just a really scary shark. But it also contains a really scary shark, so that's terrific. Okay, well, this was so great. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. I've dropped some comments in the live feed, some links to our scary movies, and also the Halloween score if you want to spook yourself out. And then I will let you know our next Curated Cinema is Tuesday, November 10th at 7 p.m. We're going to be pivoting away from the scary stuff. We talked about Hitchcock last time and scary movies this time. Our next one is Tuesday, November 10th, and we're talking about documentaries, which is another genre that I really love. And I promise I won't give you any scary documentaries. Can I promise that? I think I can promise that. No scary movies. So check us out on gortoncenter.org. You can find all the information about our upcoming events, including our film program. We have our Ghoulish Feature Fest, as I said, next Thursday and Friday, but we also have some of our Fa La La Fest tickets on sale now, and some special events, including the Lake County Film Festival. We'll be hosting 2 films, and also our first Thursday's program, our November tickets are on sale for that film 2040, The Regeneration. So check that all out. Hope to see you in person for some of these scary films. But if not, I hope that you're watching some spooky stuff at home. You've got somebody next to you that you can grab if you get scared, or at least a pillow to grab if you get scared. And don't get too scared, but it is really, really the season to spook yourself out. So I'm going to end this live video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and check you out at gortoncenter.org.